Hi, I'm Alexa, and this is a little different video than I was going to do yesterday. I don't know what was going on. Canva was not working to do my cover photo, and my computer, I went to restart it, and then it just sat spinning on restart. So here we are tonight. I figured that we could jump right into this instead. So as a naturalized citizen, one of the things that they give you, and I realized I've been saying it backwards. I've been saying immigration and citizenship services, but it's actually citizenship and immigration services. I don't know if you can see that. There we go. So it's USCIS, which isn't as easy to say for me as USICS. I don't know why, but USCIS. So every time when you get naturalized, you're actually given a nice handy dandy pocket Declaration of Independence and Constitution of the United States. And it is something that I don't know front to back, inside out, every word of it. I don't. I know enough of the the amendments and whatnot. But I thought it would be kind of cool to look through it and potentially look for resources as well. If I'm struggling to understand any of the amendments, the language in there, maybe I can look some stuff up and share that. But I thought it's something that, considering what is going on in the world and considering what is going on in the US, there's a lot of sort of misinformation or misunderstanding of what our rights are. And there's also a misunderstanding of how infringing on other people's rights is actually you allowing people to infringe on someone else's rights is you giving up your own right to that as well. Because if they can do something to someone, infringe on one person's right, they can do it to you as well. So one of the earliest sort of ideas, concept, when this kind of first hit me was in an Eminem song, and he basically says, teaching a young generation of kids to stand and fight for the right to say something you might not like. I might have a word or two misspoken in there, but in more recent years, so that would have been early 2000s when that song came out, maybe a little before. In more recent years, sometime last 5-10 years, somewhere in that range, J.K. Rowling has stepped in quite a bit of stuff. I understand, listening to different sides of certain beliefs, I don't believe in ever justifying diminishing another person in order to get your point across. So she's done quite a few missteps, but one of the things she did do was stand up for the right of certain abhorrent people or generally disliked people to say their point of view. And that point of view was not hate speech. It was just, at least in the instances she was defending, it was just a different opinion on certain things going on at the time. And I believe it was actually in the UK. I think she was defending someone in the news media there, and she basically was saying, like, he's allowed to have his opinion and you can't stop him from saying it, because if you stop him from saying it, they can stop you from saying your point of view. So definitely think that some people miss the point of the First Amendment, and that these are rules for the government. Okay, these are rules not necessarily for me as a private citizen in terms of like how I treat another private citizen or how they treat me. It is on the government not being able to infringe, but as a society, and I've said I would like to do a video on this, and I actually have done the research and have sources. We have, I call it herd mentality, or trying to get people back in line when someone is breaking the norms of societal structure, whether that's something in the bigger society at large, or whether it's just your relationship. Like, for example, a lot of people, if they have a friend who is heavier and that friend tries to take care of themselves and is losing weight, they will do things like bring them slices of cake or chocolate bar or something and say, oh, well, I saw it and I just knew how you've been doing so good, so you can have a bite or two. And it's sort of this sabotage where I don't think they even realize they're doing it. Some people might, but a lot of people don't. And it's because if that person does lose weight, the boundaries of that friendship, relationship, whatever it is, they change a little bit because there's no longer this status quo of who was what in terms of looks in a relationship. And it's crazy. That's one example, but it happens. So this thought then goes out into speech. If we are private citizens and we are talking, we can say to each other, yeah, I don't like what you just said. That's ridiculous. That's rude. That's mean. That's whatever, right? We can disagree. And we are allowed to do that. And we are allowed to call them out. And we are allowed to say, don't say that stuff to me. Do not say that stuff around me. Do not treat other people that way. Don't do this. Like, we are allowed to say that. Like, that is unacceptable. That is a private citizen thing. We are allowed to do that to each other. The governments cannot. So I did want to kind of point that out when people are complaining about infringing on free speech. Private companies are not the government. Private companies will be liable for what is on, for example, on their websites. They will be held liable for that at some point, and we will find that this swing to allow disinformation and fake AI generative posts, one day it's going to come back to bite at least one company, and suddenly companies are going to be like, oh, hell no, if we're liable for this, we're getting rid of this off of our platform. So that day can't come soon enough for me. So this handy dandy little book, which I have had now for several years, and I read it front to back. It has some quotes in the front, and from Thomas Jefferson in 1819, the Declaration of Independence, and then they've edited it to say what it means, is the declaratory charter of our rights and the rights of man. So if you read this, this does not, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution does not actually make a distinction between citizens and mankind. They talk about the rights of man. Now, we can argue whether back in the day they were actually meaning males or if they meant all of mankind. We can argue until we go blue on the face. It doesn't matter. We are 250 years in the future, and basic human rights apply to all humans, including you and including me. So they do not make a distinction between citizen and non-citizen here. They just say man. So this is what the basis of, for example, if you're an immigrant in the country, you still have all of the rights in here, except those explicitly where it labels them for citizens, which is the right to vote. In the Declaration of Independence is probably one of the most famous quotes, and hopefully people have heard this one. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, it goes on to say that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. It does go on to say a lot more, obviously. In this little book, it is 6 pages, the Declaration of Independence. So I'm not sure, it's a little bright, but you can see it's quite small text, and there's 6 pages. We know why the colonists declared their independence, who they declared their independence from, and what they set up. And we also know that they spoke very, very clearly in all of the additional papers and letters and correspondence that are saved and in history. Some of them might be in the National Archives, some of them might be in various museums. They were overturning the rule. They were declaring their independence from England, the United Kingdom of Great Britain, and the king at the time. So they also made it very clear that the US does not have a king and that no one person here has all the power. That's something that I fully support. I came from England. I was brought up as a child. We would sing God Save the Queen, and we would, similar to the schools over here, they say the Pledge of Allegiance, like we would do and say various things over there. And you're taught as a child, and it's actually a type of indoctrination. And all societies do this, and some of this is not bad, and some of it is terrible. Like indoctrination is kind of a bad thing, but in some cases you learn and you from the people around you, right? So you grow up. As I've gotten older, I had this struggle between this sense of supporting the Queen, and we were taught to always want her to do well and trust in her and this, that, and the other. And my belief in basic human rights and the belief that no one is born like special, like all because your parents are your parents doesn't mean you get to rule over everyone. Like I don't believe that. So when I chose to pursue my citizenship, I had come to this realization probably several years before that, but it was really this sort of appreciation for the fact that there are checks and balances in this country and that they are there to protect us, all of us, whether you are an immigrant or a citizen. They're there to protect us, and those checks and balances are so important, but they're also extremely fragile. People have to stand up and do the right thing, and to do that, they have to know that there will be consequences. So I've spoken about psychology and that on my channel as well. So the Constitution lays out very clearly that all legislative powers will be granted and vested in the Congress, which will consist of the Senate and the House of Representatives. It talks about how often they will have to be elected. It talks about how the elections will be held and what powers lie with the federal government to regulate and oversee them and what powers lay with the states. It talks about how they will raise revenue, taxation. It talks about how the process to amend the Constitution shall be done. It lays out the exact order in which stuff has to be done in order for amendments to be approved and become the law of the land. I don't know why this is separate, and again, I'm not reading through this exactly all the way through, but it talked about revenue, but now it's talking about power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises to pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But they shall be uniform throughout the United States. And then to establish a post office and post roads is one of the things that the taxes are to be used for. So one of the things that has come up probably many times over the years, but privatization of the U.S. Postal Service, they have to amend the Constitution in order to do that. The Postal Service is a service similar to defense of the nation. So our military, our national military, the Postal Service is quite literally in here as a service that the taxes are to be used on. The fees that they raise, they're to be used on the Postal Service. So it's not meant to be a money-making private business. Now, The Postal Service obviously does raise money through the cost of stamps and everything, and I think we're all okay with that for having such a reliable service for all citizens to use. It talks about to provide and maintain the Navy, to raise and support armies. No appropriation of money to that use shall be for a longer term than 2 years. That's interesting. I know they have to fund the government, and right now, in more recent years, they've been doing these continuing resolutions just to fund it for like 3 to 6 months at a time or whatever. I've never really noticed prior to that, and I'd have to look it up, whether they do generally in less hostile times fund the government or the army or whatever for 2 years at a time and then not deal with all of these continuing resolutions. No state shall enter into treaty, etc. So it does lay limits on the states, obviously. Then we come into Article 2. Section 1, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States of America. He shall hold the office during the term of 4 years, and together with the Vice President chosen for the same term, be elected as follows. And then it lists how we can choose the President and the votes and how they will count, how each state gets certain things. It also lists out no person except a natural-born citizen or a citizen of the United States at the time of the adoption of this Constitution shall be eligible to the office of President. Neither shall any person be eligible to that office who shall not have attained to the age of 35 years and been 14 years a resident within the United States. So the 14 years a resident, obviously that became a non-issue 14 plus years after the signing of the Constitution, because at that point, everyone who was a U.S. citizen at that point, who was made a citizen on the day of the ratification, they would have, if they had arrived the day before that, they would have been 14. So then it would just be anyone who is a natural-born citizen, basically, or a citizen at the time of the signing. It's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm just logically reasoning that out in my brain right now, but it makes sense to me. I hope I just said that the right way, because that definitely did make sense to me. But let me know if that made sense to you. Okay, so then Article 3 provides the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and Inferior Courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall, at stated times, receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Now, it goes on to list what they can oversee, the laws they can do. So that's how we get the federal judiciary. And those are the 3 branches, right? We have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. They are meant to be equal in power, and they have powers to check and balance the other 2 branches. So, for example, Congress can impeach executive or judicial. If they are not in good behavior, judges can actually be impeached and removed. Now, what does good behavior mean? Well, that's a really good question. I think most of us have a very common understanding of what good behavior is, but then I also think that that could be twisted and has been twisted for political means and by whichever side of the aisle that person was on at the time. It's quite interesting. So, yeah. The last article of the Constitution, the ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of this Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same. And then it lists out who signed them. This is a lot. Like if you were asked to come up with a government, okay, from scratch that you didn't really have an example for, like we have a lot of democracies, democratic republics, we have a lot of them in the world at this point that we could look at today and say, oh, we should model it after that if we were to write one from scratch for our country, right? If we didn't have one. Back when this was written, they didn't have those examples. I believe they probably would have had the knowledge and the study of, for example, the ancient Roman and Greek ways of governance. And that did seem to, from my understanding, and I might be mistaken, I feel like some of that did play into how they set this up. But that's it. Now, I skipped over several of the articles in there, and we can certainly look at it more in depth. But it laid out the absolute basics, the most fundamental items that must be included. And then it also, one of those was how to add to these laws of the land, which was through the amendment process. If you have ever heard of the Bill of Rights, we will study that or go through it in a future video. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments that were added by the signers of the Constitution and the ones that they came up with. And that Bill of Rights obviously includes the First Amendment, Second Amendment, Fourth, Fifth, through the 10th. So we hear a lot about the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, and then this is ridiculous, Kane. Really? Dude, your tail, come on. Lay down. Hey, come on. Sir. Sir, yes, there's stuff on my desk. Lay down. Sorry, folks. He just wanted to say hi, and I mean, he's got such a pretty tail. The Bill of Rights. We will do that in another one, and then after that, we will go through some of the remaining 27. 27? 27 minus 10. 17. Yeah, there's 27. It's important to know your rights. It's important to understand them. It's important to not just know your basic rights that are in here, but also the rights that are at the state level, and that from here, what, for example, if you're out on the street and a policeman stops you, what are your rights in that kind of situation? It's important for us to know those things as citizens. And if we know our rights, we can also see when something that sounds so common sense is really a ploy to steal our rights. Because what I've noticed is that the bad actors are always able to talk a good game. They sound great. It sounds like a great idea. They appeal to something in us, whatever it might be, whatever the subject is. And it makes us feel like, oh, no, but that does sound good. And meanwhile, underneath, right? So they're talking to you here, but back here, they're doing the stuff that's actually stealing our rights or trying to infringe on them. So I hope this was informative. I hope I hit on enough of the important parts of that. It's obviously not long enough to go through the entire thing in depth, and I'm obviously not a constitutional scholar expert. I'm just a person who is interested in this stuff, who has read this, who has studied in her own time a little bit here and there over the years. It adds up. Let me know. And I'll be doing some more, as I said. And once we've gone through the Bill of Rights and then the remaining amendments, we will find other civics topics to discuss together. Thank you if you made it this far. Have a wonderful evening. I will see you on the next one. Be kind to yourself.